As my husband, Ethan, was preparing dinner, a text message lit up his phone from a female colleague. "Hey, thinking of you. Wish I could see you." After a moment's thought, I picked up his phone and replied in his place. "Come over. The wife's out tonight." Shortly after, the doorbell rang. The blood drained from Ethan's face, leaving him pale as a ghost. The air in the spacious kitchen of our luxury Chicago condo was filled, for this evening only, with the rich, savory scent of slow-braised beef short ribs. It was the aroma of warmth, of the happy, successful home many people dream of. At least, until this moment, I had believed it was my dream, too. Ethan was at the stove, stirring the pot where the ribs simmered gently. He was wearing the expensive apron I'd given him for our anniversary, humming an old love song. From behind, he looked like the perfect man, a successful professional who cherished his home. He always used to tell me, "A man earning money outside is an obligation, but coming home to cook for his wife is a privilege." I sat at the kitchen island, flipping through an architectural magazine, but my mind was elsewhere. The warm, recessed lighting gleamed on the marble countertop, where Ethan's latest smartphone lay silent. Its dark screen was like a deep, unknowable abyss, hiding secrets that even I, the person closest to him, had never thought to suspect. Ethan turned, a bright smile on his handsome face. The fine lines beginning to form around his eyes only added to his charm. He offered me a small spoonful to taste, then turned back to his complex seasoning. That's when it happened. The screen on the table suddenly lit up. There was no sound, but a cold blue light announced the arrival of a text message. My gaze was instinctively drawn to it. The message that materialized on the screen was short, but it was enough to shatter the peaceful world I had so carefully built. Sender, Chloe, the intern. Message: "Hey, thinking of you. Wish I could see you." Just that one line. My heart no longer ached. That pain had died a week ago when I saw the bank statements. All that remained now was a cold contempt and a meticulously crafted plan. Chloe. I knew the name. She was a new intern in Ethan's department. I even remembered him praising her once, saying she was a fast learner, polite, and eager to learn. I never imagined that eagerness to learn would extend to her boss, my husband. I took a deep breath, steadying my own. The rationality of a woman in her mid-30s who had overcome numerous challenges to get where she was did not allow for screaming or breaking things. If I caused a scene, Ethan would dismiss it as a joke, a childish prank. I needed more than that. I needed irrefutable proof. Most importantly, I wanted to see the true faces of those two shameless people. Ethan was still chopping scallions. The rhythmic sound of the knife on the cutting board drowned out the frantic beating of my heart. I quietly picked up the smartphone. The passcode was our wedding anniversary. The irony was sickening. He was using the most important day of our lives as a shield for his sordid secrets. I entered the familiar 6 digits. The phone unlocked to the messaging app, with the unread text at the top. I didn't read it again. Instead, I quickly composed a reply, my fingers cold and precise on the virtual keyboard. "Come over. The wife's out tonight." I hit send. Seeing the read receipt appear, a small, cold smile touched my lips. I took a screenshot of the short exchange, sent it to my own phone, and then meticulously erased all traces from Ethan's device. I wanted him to be in a state of complete ignorance when the curtain rose on this little play. I placed the smartphone back exactly where it had been, at the very same angle. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the fury I was suppressing deep inside. I stared at Ethan's back. The same man, the same devoted posture. But now, in my eyes, it was nothing more than nauseating hypocrisy. He was playing the part of the perfect husband, but his heart was likely flying to his young, pretty mistress. If he wanted to act so badly, then I would direct the most tragic final scene for him. I smoothed my hair, composed my expression, and tried to return to my usual calm. The storm inside me was hidden behind a serene gaze, just waiting for the chance to wash everything away. Tonight would be a very, very long night. Ethan plated the braised short ribs, which were falling off the bone, onto a large platter and placed it in the center of the table. The rich aroma of spices and slow-cooked beef filled the air. He even used a cloth to meticulously wipe a tiny splash of sauce from the rim of the platter. Yesterday, I would have been moved by such delicate care and hugged him. But today, looking at those short ribs felt like staring at a beautifully sugar-coated poison. He served me a generous portion of rice and placed one of the most succulent-looking ribs on top of my bowl. In a warm, low voice, he said, "You have to eat it while it's hot. I simmered it for hours until the meat just melts in your mouth." He even boasted about how he wanted to take care of me, going to 3 different markets to find the absolute best cut of beef. I took the bowl from my husband's hands, trying desperately to keep them from shaking. I put a piece of meat in my mouth and chewed slowly. It was incredibly tender, and the seasoning was perfect for my taste. But as it went down my throat, a bitter, unpleasant taste rose up, as if I were chewing on wax. I had to take a large gulp of water to fight back the urge to vomit. I looked at the man sitting across from me. Ethan was eating heartily as usual, occasionally putting more food on my plate and telling me amusing stories from work. He talked about a new project, about being praised by his boss, and about his promotion prospects for the year. But there was not a single mention of the name Chloe or the young intern. I wondered how a person could so skillfully lead a double life. To receive an "I want to see you" text from a lover, and then, moments later, play the role of a model husband who deeply loves his wife. Perhaps, in our 6 years of marriage, he had repeated this performance so many times that even I could no longer tell what was real and what was fake. I remembered the difficult times when we first got married. Back then, we had nothing, starting out in a tiny studio apartment in a corner of the city. Ethan held my hand and vowed to work hard so I wouldn't have to struggle, to get us a beautiful home, and he kept his promise. This luxury condo, these lavish furnishings, were a testament to our joint efforts. But perhaps when people become materially wealthy, their hearts begin to change. Satiety breeds lazy desires, and the wife who once shared instant ramen with him now seemed dull compared to the young, vibrant women outside. I pretended to be full and put down my chopsticks, saying I was a bit tired and didn't have much of an appetite. Ethan immediately looked concerned. He got up, came over to my side, and placed his hand on my forehead to check for a fever. His hand was warm, but the moment it touched my skin, a chill ran down to my bones. I gently turned my face away, using the excuse of getting a glass of water to escape his hypocritical touch. I glanced at the wall clock. The short hand pointed to 7, the long hand to 10. Time was crawling by. From her office or apartment to here, it would take about 30 to 45 minutes if she was quick. She would never miss this golden opportunity. "The wife's out tonight." That phrase held a magic more powerful than any formal invitation. When I returned to the table, Ethan was clearing the dishes. He told me to rest in the living room, that he would do the washing up. The sight of my husband rolling up his sleeves to wash dishes used to be a point of pride I'd boast about to my friends, but now it was just another scene in a disgusting play. I sat on the sofa and picked up the TV remote but didn't turn it on. My gaze was fixed on the front door, and my ears were straining to catch every sound from the hallway. A fierce battle was raging within me. One half of me hoped she wouldn't come, so I could deceive myself that the message was just a momentary prank. But the other, colder, more ruthless half of me prayed for the doorbell to ring. I wanted this pain to be laid bare. A wound must be lanced to be healed, even if the scar it leaves never fades. A minute passed like an hour. The sound of running water from the kitchen stopped. Ethan came out, drying his wet hands on a towel, and asked if I wanted some fruit for dessert. I shook my head and gave a slight smile. It must have been horribly contorted and unnatural, but Ethan didn't notice. He was too confident in his own perfection. Or perhaps he had never once cared enough about my feelings to sense the abnormality in his wife's gaze. The clock struck 8 o'clock precisely. The condo was so quiet I could hear the second hand ticking. Ethan sat on the opposite sofa, scrolling through the news on his phone, looking completely relaxed. He probably thought this would be another peaceful night with his wife. Or maybe he was thinking about how to reply to his lover once I was asleep. He had no idea a storm was just moments away. Ding dong. The sound of the doorbell shattered the silence. It wasn't loud, but in this space, it sounded like the gunshot that signals the start of a war. Ethan looked up, startled, His eyes showed surprise mixed with a hint of confusion. He glanced at the clock, then at the front door, and muttered, "Who could that be at this hour?" He then looked at me as if I knew the answer. I remained seated on the sofa, maintaining a posture that was almost too calm. I told him to stay put, that I would get the door. My voice was soft but firm, leaving no room for him to argue. I stood up and walked slowly toward the entrance. With every step my heels made on the hardwood floor, it sounded like a heavy hammer driving a nail into the coffin of our marriage. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the strange excitement of a hunter about to capture its prey. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and then my hand closed around the doorknob. I unlocked it and pulled open the heavy wooden door. A young woman stood before me. She had a petite frame and was wearing neat makeup, but her face still had a touch of childishness. She was wearing a form-fitting dress that showcased her youthful body, and in her hands, she held a carefully wrapped cake box from a fancy bakery. The moment she saw me, the coquettish smile that had been playing on her lips vanished instantly, replaced by a look of extreme terror. Her eyes widened to their limit, her pupils contracting in fear, and her rosy cheeks turned as white as paper in an instant. She froze on the spot, her hands trembling so much that she nearly dropped the cake box. She had been expecting Ethan to open the door. She had probably imagined jumping into his arms and sweetly saying, "I missed you." But the cold, hard reality that slapped her in the face was the sight of me, the mistress of this house and his legal wife, standing in the doorway with a gaze as sharp as a blade. I didn't speak right away, quietly observing her terrified expression. My silence made the air even more suffocating. Chloe took half a step back and moved her lips as if to say something, but her throat was tight, as if someone were choking her. She looked inside the house, then back at me, with the expression of a thief caught in the act. From behind me, I heard Ethan's footsteps. "Who is it? Don't just stand there," he asked. His voice made Chloe flinch even more. She glanced around, as if looking for a chance to escape, but I wasn't about to let my prey get away so easily. I smiled, a smile that was probably more frightening than tears. I opened my mouth, my voice clear and loud enough to be heard by the person in the house and the person in the hallway, and full of authority. "Hello, Chloe. You must be here to see my husband." My question was like a bucket of ice water thrown on Chloe's face, and it also sent a shockwave to Ethan, who was approaching. I saw Chloe shudder. She realized she had walked into a trap, but it was too late. The door was open, and the curtain had officially risen on our play. Chloe stood there, shrinking like a quail that had wandered into a hawk's nest. She clutched the cake box so tightly her knuckles turned white. Stuttering, she managed to string together some words to explain her absurd appearance at this hour. I heard Ethan wasn't feeling well, and I was just passing by the area, so I thought I'd drop off a cake. I hope he gets better soon so he can teach me more at my internship. The lie was so clumsy it was almost laughable. I knew perfectly well that Ethan wasn't sick, and that this condo was in a secluded area you wouldn't just pass by unless you were intentionally coming here. But I didn't point that out immediately. The fun of a cat playing with a mouse is not to kill it right away, but to let it squirm in fear until it's exhausted. I maintained a faint smile, my eyes fixed on her ever-changing expression. Seeing Chloe turn to leave, I said in a voice as cold as ice, "If you take one step out of this hallway, tomorrow the entire company and your parents back in Ohio will receive all the photos and messages between you two. Come inside and talk calmly, and I'll let you save face." Chloe froze in place. Trembling, she reluctantly followed me into the house. "Since you're here, why don't you have a look around? It's a nice place, isn't it?" I said, emphasizing that I wanted to formally introduce her to my husband. I drew out the words "my husband" as if branding the man frozen behind me with a red stamp of ownership. Ethan was already in the living room. When he saw me lead Chloe inside, his face turned even paler than hers. His eyes were wide, his mouth agape, but he couldn't say a word. The smartphone in his hand fell onto the sofa with a soft thud. Ethan looked back and forth between me and Chloe, oscillating violently between extreme terror and confusion. He couldn't understand why Chloe was here, and why I was welcoming her so calmly. I led Chloe to the center of the living room and had her sit on the single armchair opposite the long sofa where Ethan usually sat. Chloe perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, knees together, unable to lift her head. I turned to Ethan and gestured for him to sit next to me. He shuffled over like a soulless corpse, beads of sweat forming on his brow despite the air conditioning being set to a comfortable 72 degrees. He sat as far away from me as possible, as if I were a bomb that could detonate at any moment. I began the introductions. Pointing to Chloe, I said to Ethan, "This is that sharp intern you were always praising. She heard her boss was sick and came all this way at this hour with a cake to check on you." Then, I introduced Ethan to Chloe, and this is the most model husband in the world, who has never once disappointed me. Each of my compliments was like a needle pricking Ethan's skin. He visibly flinched. I saw Chloe shoot a pleading glance at Ethan. She was likely hoping for a word of explanation, or at least a reassuring look that would resolve this situation. But all she got in return was cowardly avoidance. Ethan kept his head down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, refusing to say a word. His cowardice only amplified my contempt, and probably even Chloe was starting to feel a creeping sense of disappointment. The handsome, authoritative man from the office had been reduced to a timid weakling who feared his wife more than a tiger, now that his affair was exposed. I stood up, saying I would get our guest a drink. I asked Chloe what she would like: orange juice, water, or perhaps some hot tea. Chloe answered in a small voice that water would be fine. I walked toward the kitchen with a slight smile. The living room fell into a deathly silence. I knew that as soon as I left, the two of them would exchange panicked glances, but they wouldn't dare speak for fear of me overhearing. That was exactly what I wanted, to let the fear slowly eat away at their minds. In the kitchen, I deliberately clattered some cups and plates to let them know I was still close by, listening to everything. I opened the cabinet and passed over the expensive set of crystal glasses we used for important guests. My hand stopped at a stack of thin, disposable plastic cups we used for outdoor parties or roadside juice. I took one and filled it to the brim with water from the dispenser. This choice was not accidental. I wanted to belittle Chloe's worth through the smallest of details, to make her understand that her position in this house was as cheap and temporary as this disposable cup. Something to be thrown away, not worth keeping. I returned to the living room with a tray and placed the plastic cup of water in front of Chloe. Then, in front of Ethan and myself, I poured tea into our expensive, gold-rimmed bone china cups. The stark contrast between the two types of cups was glaring on the glass coffee table. Chloe's face flushed with humiliation as she looked at the plastic cup floating in a sea of fine tea settings. She understood the message I was sending. It was an insult delivered without a single word, yet deeper and sharper than any verbal tirade. I sat down next to Ethan, this time pressing myself right up against him. I linked my arm through his and gently rested my head on his shoulder. Ethan stiffened like a board, his muscles tense. Through his thin shirt, I could feel his heart hammering wildly. More cold sweat trickled down his temples. I started the conversation with hypocritical pleasantries. I asked Chloe how her internship was going, if Ethan was a strict boss, if he was bullying the interns. As I spoke, I stroked Ethan's arm and occasionally looked at him with loving eyes. Chloe answered in monosyllables, unable to look directly at the intimate scene before her. Her eyes were a mixture of jealousy, sadness, and fear. She was witnessing firsthand the fact that the man she was pursuing was legally and completely the property of another woman. The sweet promises Ethan might have whispered to her when they were together became meaningless in the face of this undeniable reality. The air in the room was suffocatingly heavy. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioner couldn't dispel the stagnant atmosphere. I felt like I was watching a tragic pantomime, with all the actors desperately trying to play their parts. Only I held the script and knew the ending. I suddenly changed the subject and spoke to Ethan in a sweet voice. I brought up our planned trip to Maui next month. I painted a picture of blue seas, white sandy beaches, and romantic candlelight dinners. Then I mentioned that we were looking for a vacation cabin in Aspen to spend weekends gardening and fishing, and that we were preparing to invite both sets of parents to stay with us in their old age. Every word I spoke was like a blade twisting in Chloe's heart. She must have realized that she was completely excluded from Ethan's life. Future plans, significant assets, long-term commitments, all of it belonged to us as a married couple. There was no place for her in that picture. She was just a passing fancy, an object of Ethan's temporary pleasure. Ethan sat as still as death, unable to agree or disagree. He looked like he was sitting on pins and needles, wishing for this mental torture to end quickly. But I wasn't about to let him off that easily. I wanted to burn this terrifying night into their memories so deeply that they would get goosebumps every time they remembered it. I smiled at Chloe and asked a question that was casual on the surface but deeply meaningful. "Chloe, you're so young and pretty. I'm sure you have a lot of men asking you out. I'm getting older, so I have to hold on tight to this old man of mine, or I'm afraid he'll get snatched away. You know how it is these days, with so many young, pretty homewreckers sprouting up like weeds, right?" Chloe flinched and lowered her head deeply. She was squeezing her hands together so tightly that her fingertips turned white. She knew exactly who I was referring to. The term homewrecker, though it came out of my mouth lightly, was as sharp as a razor, slicing through her last shred of dignity. The words homewrecker hung in the air like a dissonant chord, making the atmosphere even more awkward. Chloe didn't dare answer my question, mumbling something incoherent and avoiding my probing gaze. I saw Chloe's delicate shoulders shaking, despite her desperate attempts to control them. The confidence and allure she had when she first arrived at our home were gone, replaced by the image of a sinner awaiting judgment. I had no intention of letting them off the hook so easily. I turned to Ethan and squeezed his arm a little tighter, my nails digging slightly into his skin under the shirt, reminding him of my powerful presence. I looked up at my husband, my voice turning sweet and pleading, but my gaze remained as sharp as a blade. I asked him about the cabin in Aspen we had looked at last week. I deliberately spoke in a loud, clear voice so Chloe could hear every word. I mentioned how both our parents loved the property, how the feng shui was good, and how cool it was by the river. I further emphasized that our parents had promised to contribute $200,000 towards the interior design as a gift for their future grandchild. I felt Ethan's body go rigid at the mention of a child. This was his greatest weakness. We had been married for 6 years, but had postponed having children to achieve financial stability. Now that everything was in place, I had discovered this betrayal. But I brought up the topic of children because I knew it was the surest anchor, a respectable claim on family and society that a passing mistress like Chloe could never give him. I vividly described a happy home filled with the laughter of children. I said that next year was a good year astrologically and suited our ages, so we should definitely try for a baby boy. Then I turned to Chloe and asked, "What do you think of our plan? Isn't it just wonderful?" Startled by the sudden question, Chloe dropped the small spoon she was holding onto her plate with a sharp clatter of metal against ceramic. She hastily picked it up, her face beet red, and stammered, "Your plan! It's really wonderful. I'm sure you'll be very happy." How ironic to hear such a clumsy blessing from the mouth of a rival. I knew that inside, she was screaming, consumed with bitter jealousy. She had come here hoping to find a way into our lives, but what she got was a firm declaration of a future that had no room for her. Huge assets, strong family ties, long-term plans, all of these were formidable walls protecting this marriage, walls that someone like her, with nothing, could never break down. I continued my psychological assault from a financial angle. I told Ethan that I would transfer the remaining balance for the house payment tomorrow and that he needed to sign the title change documents quickly. I deliberately emphasized that the house would be in both our names. This was like declaring my claim to our assets, a warning that everything he had was tied to me, and if he abandoned me, he would lose everything. Ethan nodded, sweat pouring down his face. He just wanted me to shut up and stop talking. Being tortured with sweet words about the future was probably more terrifying for him than having a knife held to his throat. He knew very well what a fearsome warning each of my words carried. Don't be a fool and trade everything you have for a moment of pleasure. The talk of the house and children seemed to have stripped away the last ounce of composure Chloe had left. She shrank into the sofa, clutching the cup of water in both hands, as if trying to draw some warmth from it, even though the water had long gone cold. I glanced back and forth between the thin plastic cup in her hands and the gold-rimmed teacup in mine, feeling a cruel sense of satisfaction. I lifted my teacup, took a sip, and savored the delicate aroma of the high-quality green tea. This tea is really delicious today, I remarked. The clean bitterness is so smooth. I encouraged Chloe to drink her water, but my gaze lingered on her cheap plastic cup. With feigned sympathy, I asked her, "Is water okay for you? Or should I make you a glass of orange juice? Water must be so bland." My voice was gentle, like that of a benevolent hostess offering alms to a beggar, yet laced with condescension. Chloe hastily waved her hands. "No, it's fine. I was thirsty, so water is enough. I don't want to be a bother." The word bother that she used was truly amusing. Her very presence here at this hour was the biggest bother of all. I placed my teacup on the table. The bottom of the cup made a small but firm clink against the glass. I looked at Ethan and decided to pull him deeper into this delightful game. I told him to peel an apple for our guest. What kind of host just lets a guest sit there? "Be a gentleman," I chided. Ethan jumped as if electrocuted and scrambled to get a knife and an apple. He peeled it clumsily, his hands shaking so much that the peel broke off in short, jagged pieces. The man who had once carved carrot flowers for me could now barely peel an apple in front of his mistress. His mind was in turmoil, fear numbing all his senses and usual skills. When the plate of apples was placed on the table, I speared the best-looking slice with a fork and brought it directly to Ethan's mouth. "Open up. I'll feed you. Don't use your hands. You'll get them dirty." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan reluctantly accepted the apple I offered. The sight of a married couple affectionately feeding each other in front of a third party was both natural and extremely provocative. I pushed the plate of apples towards Chloe. "You have some too, Chloe. They're imported apples, so they're very crisp and sweet." Chloe looked back and forth between the apple slice Ethan had just eaten and the plate in front of her, looking as if she were about to choke. How could she possibly eat while witnessing such a display of affection? The differential treatment wasn't just in the cups, but in the attention and care as well. I was the wife, and I had the right to openly care for my husband and be cared for by him. But no matter how much Ethan professed to love her outside, in this house, she was just an outsider, an unwelcome guest forced to watch our marital bliss. I saw Chloe's eyes turning red. She was probably crying on the inside or regretting her foolish decision to come here to be humiliated. But I felt no sympathy. My compassion had died the moment I saw the words, "Wish I could see you" on the phone screen. Forgiveness for those who destroy the happiness of other people's families is a luxury I will never grant. Silence once again enveloped the living room, but this time it was thick with the smell of gunpowder. Perhaps wanting to break the suffocating atmosphere, or to restore some semblance of a caring image in front of Ethan, Chloe cleared her throat and cautiously began to ask about his health. "Ethan, how have you been feeling lately? Is the pain any better?" Her voice was quiet but laced with genuine concern. She even added that back in her hometown, they had a honey-infused black garlic that was very good for the stomach, and she could have her mother send some if he needed it. Hearing those words, Ethan's face went ashen. He frantically waved his hands. "I'm fine. You don't need to do that." He glanced at me in terror, knowing his foolish mistress had made a fatal mistake. She had just demonstrated a level of understanding about her boss's private life that went far beyond a normal colleague relationship. I laughed out loud. It was a short, sharp laugh, and it made both of them jump. I looked at Chloe with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. "Well, Chloe, you really are interested in your boss, aren't you? Even I, his wife who lives with him and sleeps in the same bed, haven't prepared honey-infused black garlic for him. How is it that you, a new intern, know so much about my husband's health?" I deliberately drew out the words, "lives with him," and sleeps in the same bed to remind Chloe of her place. I pressed on, giving her no room to breathe. "Does Ethan complain to you at work that he's not feeling well? Or do you two meet so often that you even know about his diet?" Chloe was at a loss for words, her face turning from red to purple. She stammered out an explanation that she had just seen Ethan grimacing and holding his stomach at the office and had guessed he had a stomach problem. It was a laughably weak excuse. I knew Ethan's stomach issues were chronic. He rarely complained about his health in public, fearing it would tarnish his image as a strong leader. He only showed such vulnerability when he was alone with someone he trusted. I shot a fiery glare at Ethan. "Why are you worrying your subordinates at the office? From now on, if you're not feeling well, tell your wife. Don't let other people go out of their way to buy you medicine. People will think your wife can't even take care of her own husband. The other day, you said you'd be late because of a client dinner and that your stomach hurt. I see. So this was the client dinner. My sarcasm hit its mark. Ethan bowed his head deeply, unable to say a word. He knew what I was implying. The night he used a client dinner as an excuse, he was actually having dinner with Chloe, probably feigning pain to gain the young woman's sympathy. I had stripped away Chloe's pretense of a colleague's concern and laid bare the truth of their ambiguous relationship. Her excessive interest was the very proof that she had crossed a line. And I, as the wife, had every right to question and expose that hypocrisy right here in my own home. The wall clock showed it was 9. The cat-and-mouse game had reached its most tense climax. I felt it was time to deliver the final, decisive blow. A blow that would completely crush the third party's spirit and serve as a final warning to my cheating husband. I slowly took my own smartphone out of my pocket and placed it on the table. Pretending to swipe through my messages, I sighed theatrically. The world is so complicated these days. You read the news and it's all about affairs and scandals. A friend of mine was telling me how bold young girls are now, sending messages to other people's husbands as if they were their boyfriends, with no sense of shame. I paused, observing their reactions. Chloe sat motionless, but her breathing had become ragged. Ethan furtively wiped the sweat from his brow with a tissue. The atmosphere was as taut as an overwound guitar string. I made my voice sharper as I continued. I often look at Ethan's phone to help him with his work, you know. But lately, I've been seeing a lot of messages from unknown numbers. I don't know who this young girl is, but her name sounded so innocent. An intern, maybe? She sends such familiar messages to Ethan. I glanced at Chloe. The color had completely drained from her face, and her red-painted lips were now pale and trembling. I paused for effect, then delivered the direct hit. You know, Chloe, the other day, I was at home, and my husband was making dinner, and some girl sent a message to his phone saying, "Wish I could see you." Don't you think that's bold? The wife is right here in the house, and she has the nerve to send a message like that. Was she trying to challenge me? My words struck Chloe like a bolt of lightning. She stared at me with wide eyes, terror clearly written in them. She understood everything. The "wish I could see you" message earlier, and the reply, "Come over. The wife's out tonight." It was all a trap. A perfect trap that I had set, and she had flown into it as foolishly as a moth to a flame. Chloe's hands and feet began to tremble uncontrollably. She looked at me as if I were a monster. She realized that the woman sitting in front of her was not a docile, easy-to-handle housewife, but a terrifying master of psychological warfare. I had known everything from the beginning, yet I calmly acted my part, invited her into my home, poured her water, and offered her cake. And then, I peeled away her mask, layer by layer, until she was completely naked in her shame. Ethan, sitting next to me, was also in shock. He turned to look at me, his gaze filled with disbelief. He never would have imagined that I had read that message, and that I was meticulous enough to lure Chloe here to shame her. He must have been chilled to the bone by my intelligence and my cruelty. He realized he had grossly underestimated me, his wife. I looked directly into Chloe's eyes. My gaze was cold and targeted. There was no need to say anything more. My silence was the harshest verdict. I had exposed everything, but I still hadn't mentioned her name directly, to see if she had enough self-respect left to retreat on her own. This was the last mercy I would grant her before she left this house. Chloe couldn't take it anymore. The invisible pressure emanating from me, Ethan's cowardice, and the cruel truth that had just been revealed shattered her will. She felt as if she were sitting in an electric chair, every second an eternity of torture. Chloe hastily grabbed her handbag from the side. In her rush, she knocked the bag against the chair with a clatter. She stood up abruptly, her legs so weak she almost collapsed. She couldn't look me in the eye and, with her head bowed low, muttered that she had to go home. She made up an excuse that something urgent had come up at home and her mother wanted her back right away, apologizing for not being able to stay longer. Her voice was hoarse, on the verge of tears. Without waiting for a reply from me or Ethan, she scurried towards the door like a cornered thief. The cake box she had brought was left on the table, a lonely testament to the miserable failure of her visit. Ethan reflexively started to get up, perhaps to see her out, but I was faster. I placed my hand on his thigh and pressed down firmly, signaling him to stay put. My eyes flashed a warning. Don't do anything stupid in this situation. Ethan understood my intention and sat frozen, his eyes following Chloe's retreating figure as she disappeared behind the wooden door. I stood up and slowly followed Chloe to the door. In contrast to her frantic state, I walked with a leisurely, composed gait. Chloe was trying to put on her shoes, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold them. I leaned against the door frame, my arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Just as she finally got her shoes on and was about to open the door to the hallway, I called out to her, "Chloe!" Chloe froze in her tracks, startled. She looked back over her shoulder, her back still to me, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. She probably feared that I would cause a scene in the condo hallway, scream at her, or pull her hair. But I didn't. My dignity wouldn't allow me to behave like a common shrew. I walked closer to her and whispered in her ear, in a voice only the two of us could hear. My voice was as soft as the wind but as cold as ancient ice. "Next time you want to see my husband, make sure to call ahead. Walking around this late at night, the neighbors might see and get the wrong idea about what a respectable young lady like you is doing. And remember this, Ethan's wife isn't always out." Hearing those words, the last bit of color drained from Chloe's face. She nodded her head repeatedly like a chicken pecking at grain, stammering, "Yes, yes," and then practically ran towards the elevator. She frantically pressed the button, as if she couldn't escape this place fast enough. Her reflection on the bright hallway tiles looked small, lonely, and pathetic. I watched until the elevator doors closed, swallowing her whole. A faint smile touched my lips. One down. The young thing had surely learned her lesson. She wouldn't come near my husband again, not even for money. But the war wasn't over. The main enemy, the one who had inflicted the deepest wound on me, was still sitting in that living room. I turned and slammed the door shut. The sound of the deadbolt locking echoed with a dry click. It was the sound that signaled the beginning of the judgment for my unfaithful husband. I took a deep breath, my expression returning to its cold mask, and went back inside. The wooden door closed, completely sealing this deathly quiet condo from the outside world. The victorious smile on my lips vanished like a candle flame in the wind. I didn't go back immediately, standing for a few seconds with my hand on the cold doorknob. I felt a wave of nausea rising from the pit of my stomach. I had just put on a brilliant performance, but the price was a deep wound in my heart that was bleeding profusely. I turned and slowly walked back into the living room. Ethan was still sitting motionless on the cream-colored leather sofa. His head was bowed low, his hands clasped on his knees. He looked nothing like the polished, confident husband I knew. He looked utterly pathetic, but his misery did not evoke a single shred of pity in me, only deepening my contempt. I walked up to him, picked up his smartphone that was lying abandoned on the table. I looked at it, then at him. Then, I suddenly swung my arm down and smashed the phone hard against the tempered glass coffee table. Crack! An ear-splitting sound shattered the suffocating silence. The smartphone screen shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, a perfect mirror of our marriage. Ethan looked up at me, his face ashen with shock. I crossed my arms and looked down at him with an icy gaze. In a sharp, clipped voice devoid of any emotion, I said, "Explain. That message. Come over. The wife's out tonight. I sent that. Did you think I was some kind of clueless fool?" Ethan's mouth fell open, and he stared at me in disbelief. He never expected me to play my cards so quickly and so decisively. He probably thought I was just vaguely suspicious, never dreaming that I held all the evidence from the very beginning. His lips moved, trying to form a weak excuse. "Claire, it's a misunderstanding. She's just a colleague from work. Her coming here tonight was a complete surprise to me, I swear." I had no idea. He tried to play the victim, his eyes darting around to avoid my gaze. I scoffed. "Just a colleague? Does a colleague send you a message at 8 p.m. saying she wants to see you? Does a colleague know more about her boss's diet and health than his own wife? Does a colleague come over to her boss's house thinking his wife is away?" I moved closer, looming over him, and enunciated each word with force. Don't take me for a fool. We've lived together for 6 years. I know you better than you know yourself. That furtive, thieving posture, your shock at the doorbell, your cowardly behavior in front of your mistress, all of it already condemned you. Ethan lowered his head, not attempting to argue. He must have realized that in the face of this clear truth, all lies were futile. His silence was the most definitive confession. I felt a profound sense of disappointment. The man I had loved and trusted implicitly was now just a pathetic liar, a coward who wouldn't take responsibility for his actions. Ethan's silence only fueled my anger. I didn't need a hollow apology. I wanted him to face the ugly truth he was so desperately trying to hide. I went to my bag on the shelf and pulled out a stack of documents I had prepared that afternoon. This was the evidence I had been secretly gathering for a week, ever since I first felt something was wrong. I threw the stack of papers in front of Ethan, the white sheets scattered messily over the shattered smartphone. Ethan picked up one of the papers. His hands were shaking violently. It was a bank statement, a detailed transaction history for the past 3 months. I had circled in red every transfer to an account under the name Chloe, transfers made under vague descriptions like project bonus or lunch expenses. The amounts weren't huge, a few $100s at a time, but the frequency was damningly high. One particular transaction from last week stood out: $1,500, with the note, "Happy birthday." I pointed to the statement, my voice rising. "How do you explain this money? You spent $1,500 on an intern's birthday present? For my birthday, all I got was a bouquet of flowers and a simple dinner. Your audacity is truly impressive." Ethan was speechless, sweat pouring off him like a waterfall. He never would have imagined I had such a detailed grasp of his finances, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out screenshots of text messages I had taken from his tablet, which he had forgotten to log out of. Flirtatious words, plans for dinner and movies, and messages expressing a sickeningly sweet affection. I threw down another photo. It was a picture of 2 movie tickets for 11 p.m. 2 weeks ago. That night, he had told me he was late because of a client dinner, but he was actually at the movies with his mistress. Finally, I presented a photo of a long, brown-dyed hair I had found on the passenger seat of his car. My hair is short and black. This hair was clearly hers. Faced with irrefutable concrete evidence, Ethan completely crumbled. There were no more denials, no more excuses. The mask of a moral, upstanding man was torn away, revealing the traitor beneath. Ethan's hands fell to his sides, and he slumped onto the sofa, a look of despair on his face. He started to cry, the rare tears of a man now streaming down his face. I was wrong. I was temporarily insane. She seduced me. Please, just forgive me this one time. A belated apology, and a cowardly attempt to shift the blame. Men who cheat always have the same repertoire. I was tempted. I couldn't help myself. Watching him cry, I felt my heart turn to ice. I went to the kitchen and brought back the pot of braised short ribs he had spent all afternoon lovingly preparing. As Ethan watched in stunned silence, I dumped the entire contents of the pot into the trash can in the corner of the room. The rich, savory smell of the ribs mixed with the sour stench of garbage, creating a vile odor. I turned back to Ethan and delivered my final words. My love for you is just like these short ribs. Once, it was truly delicious and precious. But once it's been tainted, it's nothing more than garbage. And I don't eat garbage. My action of dumping the short ribs was like a splash of cold water on Ethan's face, snapping him out of his delusion. He realized I wasn't joking. The determination in my eyes and my actions foreshadowed an irreversible catastrophe. Ethan rushed over and fell to his knees, clinging to my legs. He cried desperately, begging me not to go, not to divorce him. He swore he would cut off all contact with Chloe, that he would quit his job, that he would do anything to atone for his mistake. He brought up his parents and our 6 years of marriage to try and make me stay. I stood there like a statue, letting him cling to my legs and cry. My heart was already dead. His vows only made me feel more disgusted. If he truly cherished our 6 years together, he wouldn't have had another woman. If he truly thought about his parents, This situation would never have happened. I coldly shook off his hands and stepped back. I looked at him with a pitying gaze and said, "Have some final shred of dignity. Don't make yourself look any more pathetic. My decision is final." I turned and walked straight to the bedroom. A large suitcase I had packed that afternoon was hidden in the closet. I pulled it out and packed a few more clothes and necessary personal items. I didn't take much. Only what was truly mine. The furniture in this house now seemed tainted by betrayal. I came out to the living room, pulling the suitcase behind me. Ethan was still on the floor, slumped over and sobbing. His cries echoed in the quiet space. I placed a single sheet of paper I had printed earlier on the table. It was the IOU for the $50,000 my parents had lent us when we first got married because we were short on funds for renovations, along with the receipt issued by my father. "This $50,000 is a clear debt. Don't even think about not paying it back," I said in a cold voice. "When you sell the house, you'll pay back this loan first, and then we'll split the rest. Not a single penny less. I'm not going to fight you for the house, even though it's in both our names. You can have it as a place to live with your mistress, but you will pay back my parents' money." Ethan looked at the document, then at me. His gaze was desperate. I knew he couldn't come up with that much money in a day, but I didn't care. That was the price he had to pay for his betrayal. I wanted him to feel the pain of loss, both emotionally and financially, to his very bones. I pulled my suitcase and walked to the door. Before leaving, I took one last look around the house. The place that was once our sanctuary had now become the tomb of my love. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold hallway. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed again, putting an end to 6 years of my youth with that shameless man. I didn't look back. I walked straight towards the elevator. A new life was waiting for me. It might be lonely, but at least it would be clean and peaceful. The taxi sped through the empty city streets. I sat in the back seat, watching the streetlights blur past the window. My mind was empty, but strangely light. I didn't cry. The tears had already flowed inward, crystallizing into sharp shards of resolve. I was heading to the apartment of my best friend since college, Olivia. Olivia was a renowned lawyer in the city, specializing in divorce and asset division cases. She was strong, decisive, and incredibly smart. I had called her beforehand, so she was already waiting in the lobby when I arrived. Seeing my haggard face as I got out of the car with my suitcase, Olivia didn't ask any questions. She just walked over silently and gave me a tight hug. The warmth of her friendship almost made my tears fall, but I held them back. This was not the time to be weak. Olivia took me up to her apartment. It was small but cozy, filled with the pleasant scent of lemongrass essential oil. She handed me a glass of warm water and told me to sit down and tell her everything. I told her everything, from the fateful message to the charade of inviting Chloe over, the confrontation with Ethan, and my decision to leave. I spoke with a strange detachment, as if I were telling someone else's story. When I finished, Olivia slammed her hand on the table. She let out a curse word and then praised me for handling it so well. She said that cheating men were unforgivable, and the way I dealt with the other woman was incredibly refined and civilized, yet at the same time, extremely cruel. Olivia began to analyze the situation from a legal perspective. She reviewed the evidence I had collected, the bank statements, the messages, the photos. She nodded, saying it was more than enough to give me the upper hand in court. If Ethan didn't agree to an amicable divorce, she would help me file a lawsuit. But Olivia said that before we went to court, we should teach that perfect couple a lesson they would never forget. Divorce was just a release for me. True justice was punishing the betrayers. Olivia proposed a more sophisticated revenge plan. Instead of fighting and bickering or exposing them on social media to become public gossip, we would attack what was most important to Ethan, his career and his reputation. Olivia told me to compile all the evidence into a single file. She would help me draft an official complaint email to be sent to the management of Ethan's company. A fatal blow to his finances and credibility would take everything from him and would be 1,000 times more painful than a few slaps. I nodded in agreement. A new light of determination shone in my tired eyes. Tonight, we would plan our final battle. The weekend passed in a dreadful silence. Ethan called and texted countless times, but I didn't respond. I turned off my phone and spent all my time at Olivia's, preparing a special gift for my husband and his mistress. Olivia helped me draft the email. It wasn't full of accusations or slander, but was written in a professional, objective, and sharp tone, like a legal indictment. The subject line was short but weighty. Report regarding violation of company code of conduct and fraternization policy. Team lead Ethan Miller and intern Chloe Davis. I scanned all the evidence. Screenshots of lewd chat messages, proof of inappropriate use of funds with records of transfers from his salary account for gifts, and photos of movie tickets purchased during working hours, proving dereliction of duty. Olivia helped me compile all of this into a PDF file of over 10 megabytes, with dates, times, and locations clearly annotated. Monday morning, the sky was gray, as if heralding a storm. At exactly 9 a.m., when all office workers were at their desks and starting to check their emails, I turned on my laptop. Olivia sat next to me and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I took a deep breath and checked the draft one last time. The recipient list included the CEO, the head of human resources, and the heads of relevant departments. I didn't send it indiscriminately to all employees. I didn't want to be someone who spreads cheap gossip. I only sent it to the people with the highest authority, the ones who could decide the fate of Ethan and Chloe. The mouse cursor hovered over the send button. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the tension of a decisive moment. This one click would completely change the lives of 3 people. Ethan would lose the career he had built over a decade. Chloe would lose the future she was just beginning to blossom. And I would formally close the painful chapter of my past and move on to a new page. I remembered Chloe's arrogant gaze when she came to my home. I remembered Ethan's cowardly figure as he knelt and begged for forgiveness. I remembered the braised short ribs thrown in the trash. The last shred of pity in my heart vanished. "Goodbye, my ex-husband," I whispered in my heart, and then I clicked the left mouse button firmly. Sent. A short, cold notification appeared on the computer screen. The email, carrying the death sentence for Ethan and Chloe's careers, was gone. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long sigh of relief. It was over. The arrow had been shot, and no one could stop it now. All that was left was to wait for the storm to rain down on the heads of the betrayers. That Monday, the atmosphere at Ethan's company was probably as suffocating as it was in my home the night Chloe came over. According to a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same department as Ethan, my email sent a massive shockwave through the company as soon as it was sent, spreading like wildfire. Ethan tried desperately to act normal when he came to work, but he must have been trembling with extreme fear on the inside. At 10 a.m., the head of HR summoned Ethan to a meeting room. There, they presented evidence that Ethan had used his corporate card for personal expenses with Chloe and had falsified expense reports to cover it up. This was clear embezzlement, and he was ordered to go on indefinite leave pending a full audit. Ethan stood up, his face deathly pale. He opened his mouth to try and explain, to say it was a misunderstanding, a conspiracy, but the HR head firmly raised a hand to cut him off. He then placed a thick binder on the table, a printed copy of the very PDF file I had sent. Faced with irrefutable, concrete evidence, Ethan was speechless. 2 security guards approached and requested that Ethan pack his personal belongings and leave the office immediately. Everyone was stunned to see the once respected team lead being escorted out of the company like a criminal. Ethan walked silently through the whispers of the people staring at him, his head bowed in shame. This terrifying humiliation would remain as an indelible stain on his career. Listening to this account over the phone at Olivia's house, I felt no stirrings in my heart. I didn't laugh with satisfaction, but I didn't feel sorry for him either. That was the price of betrayal. When he trampled on our marital vows and pursued his desires, he had already signed the papers that put an end to his own career. 3 days later, the official termination decision was made. The reason stated on the company bulletin was gross violation of professional ethics and negative impact on the company's image and credibility. Ethan had not only lost his job, but was also blacklisted by HR professionals in the industry. In this city, rumors travel faster than the wind. Once his morality was questioned, especially with a scandal involving a subordinate, the doors to his career were effectively sealed shut. The financial consequences came crashing down like a tidal wave. Ethan had lost his main source of income, but the bank loans were unforgivingly due. Car payments, the condo mortgage, credit card bills, all of these became nooses tightening around his neck. Before, with his high salary and my smart management of our finances, he had lived a life of affluence, without a second thought to price tags. Now, just the monthly interest payments to the bank were enough to make him break out in a cold sweat. My phone rang incessantly. It was Ethan's number. Seeing the name husband flashing on the screen, I scoffed and immediately changed his contact name in my address book to Ethan Miller. I didn't answer, letting the phone ring until it stopped. Then came a flood of messages. At first, they were apologies, begging for another chance, pleading with me to retract my complaint. When I remained silent, his tone changed to one of accusation, calling me cruel and heartless for ruining his future. I skimmed them and deleted them all. Cruel? When he was in bed with another woman, while I was at home alone preparing dinner and waiting for him, had he ever thought of the word cruel? When he was using our joint assets to buy expensive gifts for his mistress, had he ever thought of my hard work? I had only taken back the justice I deserved. I also received calls from his parents in his hometown. His mother cried and berated me for being a bad wife who had destroyed her family. She said it was common for men to have a little fling, and that a woman should be patient to keep the family together. Listening to her words, I felt a bitter sadness for the fate of women. I quietly told his mother that I could not live with a cheater and hung up. Then I blocked the numbers of his entire family. I no longer wanted to hear any hypocritical moral lectures. Ethan had now truly lost everything. His wife, his family, his career, his reputation, and a mountain of debt. He would wander in that large, empty condo, facing the four walls and a crushing loneliness. That was the most fitting punishment for someone who didn't cherish what he had. Chloe's fate was not much different. Immediately after Ethan was put on leave, Chloe was also summoned to HR. She entered the room with swollen eyes and a haggard look, the confident allure from that night completely gone. The decision to terminate her internship contract early was made on the spot. The reason was violation of internal relationship policies and disruption of team cohesion. Chloe cried and begged the HR staff for another chance, saying she was young and had been foolishly tempted. But in a cold corporate environment, such naive excuses were useless. The company she was interning at was a major corporation. A record of being dismissed in disgrace meant that the doors to her future were half closed. More terrifying than losing her job was the cold stares of her colleagues. The story of the brazen mistress who had challenged the wife in her own home had become the hottest topic in the company's anonymous chat rooms. As Chloe packed her personal belongings into a cardboard box, no one spoke to her or offered to help. Everyone looked at her with contemptuous eyes and whispered behind her back. The men who had once hit on her now avoided her like the plague, afraid of being drawn into the scandal. Chloe left the office alone, clutching the box of her belongings. The long, stark hallway seemed like the thorny path that lay ahead of her. In front of the elevator, she ran into the same security guard who had witnessed her being kicked out of my building just a few days earlier. The guard's pitying look was the last drop in an overflowing cup, and Chloe finally broke down and sobbed loudly. She fled from the building amidst the stares of others. I heard from Olivia that after the incident, Chloe couldn't stand the harsh glares from those around her and moved out of her apartment. She also made all her social media accounts private and disappeared from the virtual world. It was a lesson learned at too high a price for a young woman just starting out in life. She had tried to trade her looks and youth for something she thought was valuable, but in the end, she lost what was most precious for a woman: her honor and self-respect. I didn't feel sorry for Chloe. She had chosen that path, ignoring morality and ethics, and the consequences were entirely her own responsibility. I only hope that after this painful failure, she learns to live the rest of her life a little more righteously. 2 months later, we met again at the courthouse for our divorce mediation. Ethan looked 10 years older. His beard was unkempt, his clothes shabby. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but I maintained a cold and distant demeanor. Olivia was there as my legal representative. Her professional and sharp presence made Ethan shrink even more. In court, Ethan still tried to cling to the hope of reconciliation, saying he still loved me and wanted to repair our relationship. But Olivia presented the undeniable evidence of his infidelity, shattering his faint hopes in an instant. The division of assets became a tense standoff. The luxury condo was our biggest asset. Out of pride, Ethan wanted to keep the house. He didn't want to be left homeless. He proposed to pay me my share of the property in monthly installments. I laughed out loud, a nauseating laugh, and shook my head firmly. I would never allow myself to be entangled with my ex-husband over money. Olivia presented our demand on my behalf. Ethan could either pay me 50% of the house's value, plus the $50,000 my parents had given for renovations in one lump sum, or we would sell the house and split the money. He would also be solely responsible for his share of the mortgage. The color drained from Ethan's face. Unemployed and sitting on a mountain of debt, where was he supposed to get hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash? The bank had already started sending foreclosure notices, as he had been delinquent on his interest payments for 3 consecutive months. In the end, Ethan had no choice but to agree to sell the house. The condo that was once his pride was put on the market at a price below market value for a quick sale. After paying off the mortgage, my share, and my parents' $50,000, there was very little left for Ethan. Ethan signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand. The crooked signature put an end to our 6-year marriage. He left the courthouse empty-handed, both literally and figuratively. He had no house, no car, it had already been sold to pay off debts, no wife, and no job. He stood alone in the sun-drenched courthouse courtyard, silently watching my taxi drive away. The price was too high, but it was all his own doing. After the sale of the house, I received my share of the assets. It was a substantial amount, enough to start a new life. I didn't choose a large condo like before, but a small, cozy apartment in a quiet, green neighborhood. I decorated my new home to my own taste. There was no more flashy, ostentatious furniture to satisfy Ethan's vanity. Instead, soft beige tones, vibrant houseplants, and rustic wooden bookshelves filled the space. Every corner of the house reflected my personal taste, and it felt wonderfully peaceful. Tonight, I invited Olivia over for a housewarming. We sat on the balcony, enjoying the cool breeze, sipping red wine, and looking out at the lit-up city. Olivia toasted to my escape from disaster and my newfound freedom. I smiled at my dear friend and clinked my glass against hers. If it hadn't been for Olivia, for her strength and determination, I probably wouldn't have been able to navigate this storm so triumphantly. A notification chimed on my smartphone. My salary had just been deposited. I had successfully completed a major project and been promoted to team leader. My busy work life gradually freed me from the pain of the past. I opened my messaging app and saw a message from a stranger. The profile picture was a field of sunflowers in full bloom. She was thanking me. It turned out that Olivia had shared an anonymized version of my story in a women's community forum to serve as a cautionary tale for others. Reading my story, this woman said she had found the courage to leave her husband, who had been subjecting her to years of domestic violence and infidelity. Reading her message, my heart felt strangely warm. My suffering had not been completely meaningless. It had become an inspiration and a lesson for other women who were lost in a sea of pain. I took a deep breath, savoring the cool autumn night air. The past was locked away behind the courthouse doors. Now, a wide, hopeful sky stretched out before me. I am 32 years old, single, independent, and happy. I smiled and took another sip of wine. The tartness of the wine and the sweet aftertaste that lingered in my throat were just like my life now. Only after overcoming the bitterness can one truly savor the sweetness of freedom. Thank you for listening to my story until the end.